Hi, everybody. Can everybody hear me? Yeah? Sweet. Okay, a couple things as we get started. The first is that I want to point something out. The silent disco aspect of this presentation or this panel. Has anybody here been on one of these silent disco style panels before? All right, so we can all acknowledge it's a little bit different, but we'll go through it and it'll all be great. But please be engaged as you possibly can. We will have questions at the end. Save them, write them down, and we look forward to hearing from you. The first thing, though, that we really want to just point out is to embarrass one of our panelists, Laura Citron, who received her OBE yesterday. Heartfelt congratulations to Laura. Okay, so the topic of this panel is called Resetting the Investment Ecosystem. Just to start things off, just a quick introduction from me, and then we'll move on to the panel. My name is Mark Taylor. I'm a co-founder and chief product officer at a company called Sightline Climate. You might know us from the newsletter that we produce called Climate Tech VC or TTVC. But really what we do is market intelligence for the new climate economy, helping governments, banks, corporates, investors figure out what to do in the here and now for making climate tech investments, procurements, acquisitions, strategies, take your pick. The idea is that everybody's fairly convinced, if you're at this conference, that the world is going to look different out in 2050. So we're not in the business of forecasting out to 2050, but really telling our users, helping our clients understand what's happening in the here and now. We produce a report every half year that's public on the CTVC newsletter about climate tech investment trends. And one thing I'd like to point out about Reset is that this year, in 2023 into 24, there was a 30% drop in climate tech venture and growth investment. Now, that can mean a lot of things. And I want to start by saying kind of what Reset, the climate tech investing ecosystem means to me, and then we'll pass that on to the crowd, the panel. It's going to be four things for me. The first is that most of the big bets were made. A lot of the big bets were made. If I'm Bill Gates and Breakthrough, et cetera, I've already made my $2 billion investment in Commonwealth Fusion, right? I'm not going to make another to compete with that. And that was done in 21, 22. The next is that the preferences have changed. So back in 2020, 21, there was a lot of investment that went into alternative proteins and alternative, sustainable farming, et cetera, but those preferences have changed quite a bit, and they've moved into more industry or industrial applications, where that sector or that vertical is growing, but alternative proteins has dropped off a cliff. The next is that last year, 23, was really a pause, I would say. A pause for regulation, a pause to see, okay, what are we going to do about the SFDR regulations in Europe, or the CBAM regulations, or how are the IRA rules going to be implemented in the US? Or, kind of a take your pick of let's wait and see how this all plays out and how we need to enact our strategy going forward. And our thesis is that we're starting to see moves based on those regulations happening this year. And I think that's fair to say that we are. The final thing I'll say is that really there was a flurry or flood of climate tech investment in 20 through 23. But now a lot of those companies that have moved on from Series A, B, C, or from seed to Series A, B, C, are getting to the point where they need to build their first projects, right? And those require a different set of tools, a different set of financing, different mindset. And so a lot of that investment is either waiting to happen or is in process of happening right now. So that's kind of what the reset means to me, is that it's a big opportunity, but things are changing right now. Call it teething, graduating, whatever you'd like. But I'd like to pass it down the line, starting with Laura, really of what the reset means to you, and then we'll get going from there. Laura?
Thanks, Mark. Thank you for the very kind congratulations and for the intro. I certainly feel smarter. Welcome everyone to London Climate Action Week and to Excel and to London if you are visiting us internationally. So I'm Laura Citron and I'm Chief Executive of London and Partners, and we are the growth agency for London. So our mission is to create growth in London that is sustainable and resilient and inclusive. In the context of this question, I'm going to focus on the ecosystem part because we have some fantastic investors here who I'm sure will focus on the investment word. So we build innovation ecosystems in London. Why do we do that? Because we believe that cities or clusters grow when we can connect ideas, capital, and talent efficiently. So we're in the business of connecting ideas, capital, and talent as efficiently as possible to create growth. And so when we think about climate tech in particular as a vertical, we try not to think about it as a very linear process of investment from LP to GP and into a startup, because yes, obviously that matters, but that surrounding ecosystem of academia, talent, regulators, policymakers, incubators, accelerators, market makers, corporate buyers is critical to that investment ecosystem. So we think about and we work on bringing all of those groups together as efficiently as possible so that those ideas and that money can flow to create that ecosystem for investment. So for me, that's when I think about resetting the ecosystem, it's how can we be more efficient and more open and more inclusive in how we build those ecosystems in which investment lands and in which companies grow.
Hi everybody, my name is Robert and I'm an investment associate at the Clean Growth Fund. Laura, I also believe very much in ecosystem development and that kind of unleashing innovation in many different ways. So Clean Growth Fund is a VC. We invest in early stage companies. Our kind of scope of impact is a bit different, so we can kind of do that by driving change or investing in companies. What I think for us, resetting the investment ecosystem is shifting a bit from going from software kind of investments and going into hardware. For climate change, the solutions will be tangible products, or a lot of them will be. And currently within the venture capital space, there's a preference for easier, maybe not easier, but softwares which have smaller commercialization times, higher gross margins, and less capital to kind of deploy at scale. So we're a team of kind of investors who really like hardware and understand kind of the impact and potential to kind of capitalize on hardware investments. So yeah, that's for us.
Hi, my name is Zachary Webb and I work for M&G Investments. M&G is a £340 billion asset manager, but we're also an asset owner. So we have 150 billion of policyholder money that's been building since 1848. So when we built Catalyst, which is the strategy that I look after in EMEA, but it's a global strategy, it's a $6 billion evergreen global strategy focused on climate and environment, health and advanced technologies. We wanted to be able to say, how could we actually repurpose some of that capital for our end policyholders so that they could have benefits beyond just a strong return on their investments. And so we have that sort of double bottom line in terms of how we're measured. And so when we set about deploying that capital at the start of 21, this was even pre-SFDR, and it was relatively early days in terms of, you know, sizable, scalable capital coming into the market, and I think we're one of the largest private sustainability funds out there, and we're certainly the most flexible. And I guess when you talk about the reset aspect, it's interesting the points you mentioned about VCs. You know, money was free when we set this up in 21. Actually, it costs money to put your money somewhere. And so therefore, people were throwing money around like it didn't cost anything. And now we're at a point where actually capital has a cost, so capital becomes more discerning. That's the biggest difference. The second point is the capital markets were never set up for this. As you make the point about hardware, all the VC money, which is patient, was set up to do effectively software, with the exception of computers and semiconductors. And so then when you start getting into heavy capex hardware, you're having to reposition a ton of people from the infrastructure world that never took demand risk in their lives. And then the PE guys already want the thing to be profitable before they can invest in it. So who's going to invest in this? And that's why we said, okay, well, there's this big missing middle around this where you can invest, where you need serious size capital to take those businesses on from the next stage. And so there was a kind of a spray and pray, I suppose, in 2021 across all kinds of ideas. And you mentioned about fusion. Fusion's probably the longest bet that's out there. And no matter how big a believer you are in it, you still have to invent the material science that the stuff won't melt. You know, so it's a good idea, and it's great if you can generate the heat of the sun, just don't get melted in the meantime. So, you know, kind of alongside that, then you have to think, what are the things that are investable today? And I think we'll come to talk about that stuff in a little bit of time. But there's a big reset that needs to happen about capital markets setting themselves up for the biggest spend, but the most productive spend that ever has to happen in human history. And then the other side of that is who are the right investors and what are the right approaches for them to try to take those views.
My name is Sander Pilgraat and I'm the CEO of Dutch Cleantech. We supply water treatment plants. Essentially already 60 years, SME company. So I look at the investment side of things also from an SME point of view. So relatively small company, direct, agile, competitive. Because as my neighbor said, investing in infrastructure projects, that's difficult. And water treatment plant is an infrastructure project. So how can we change this investment landscape? And then I realized that in my country, in the Netherlands, there is 500 billion euros worth of private savings. And savings, not assets, savings sitting in bank accounts. Look to the European Union, we have 10,000 billion euros worth of private savings. So I thought if we can mobilize those savings to invest in projects like water treatment plants to provide clean water to people who need it, that will be an idea. So that's how we, and it sounds simpler than it is because it was a big task to set it up. But that's how we started 2 years ago, and we're doing it. We're funding from private people. We're using that money to invest in water treatment plants, and I think the advantage of private investors is they just want to have their interest 4 times per year, and they want their money back after 5 years or 7 years. They don't ask any difficult questions. At the same time, that also gives us a big responsibility to take good care of those people's money, and we're responsible for to manage their investments, basically. So that's the way we look at it.
My name is Florian Kemmerich. I'm Managing Director of Capital Mobilization at Palladium. We are a 60-year-old company. We operate in over 100 countries, 75 offices, 3,500 employees, with a pool of 40,000 consultants on the ground, mostly on development programs. And that includes specifically, of course, now, it's a long time, also looking at climate and nature at a large sense. And there we run programs like mobilizing finance for forests, for example, is one of the programs supported by the UK government, and then directly with the influence of DFIs like FMO from the Netherlands. We also ran a program like Partnership for Forests specifically. But if you now translate that from a development stage, how do you bridge it over to the financing side and the private capital? And that's actually where my team comes into. So we translate what our colleagues do around the world to how to make it investable, how to go public, private, and private. A lot has to do with blended finance also. I've been around a decade right now in the place of blended finance, catalytic capital, equity on top, and these things. Because the big problem is, and the big gap is, where we have to reset is, actually how do we make nature investable? And that can be from a tech side, that can be from an infrastructure, you mentioned that before, now also. It can be SME side, there are different angles to it, but you need holistic solutions for a holistic problem. Because you have a lot of money sitting there wanting to be deployed, and then you look at, where's the pipeline? How can I invest? What are my returns? How can I adjust the risk-reward return? And those are the topics where we really look at the larger scale, where we actually collaborate with asset owners and asset managers also on the pipeline development of those programs. For example, we recently launched one with Lombardier in East Africa, which is land, coffee, and nature around that. So those are the examples, but includes also specifically. So resetting means also a holistic solution where we have unisono understand how we can bring in different type of capital and projects to actually make them investable.
Amazing. Okay, thank you everybody. As a quick aside, I have two problems as a moderator. The first is I accidentally knocked over Laura's water, and so we'll try to get that fixed. But second is I've got a ton of questions already, so this is kind of out the window. But Zach, let's start with you. So M&G is a big fund, Catalyst is a big fund, excuse me. Is that the right name? Did I get that name right? Yeah, the Catalyst Fund, yeah. Excuse me. Is there anything beyond size that makes the fund so flexible? You mentioned flexibility part. Is there anything else as part of your thesis that makes the fund flexible?
Well, it's evergreen, and we effectively do three different things. So we have a debt fund, but we also sit within a much larger firm, right? So we're able to pull all of these pieces together. And we then have the equity fund, which is 5 of the 6 billion.
Okay.
And within the equity fund, we can do assets, and we can also do growth equity, typically into technology-based companies.
What are you seeing most? Is it assets or technology-based companies? Is there
we see loads of stuff.
All of it.
I don't count all of the bits in the inbox. It's a bit, so we get to see a lot of stuff, right? So we've got, a regenerative farming platform in Europe, and we're buying farms and turning them to regenerative practices, because farmers will never be able to do this themselves. It's too holistic and difficult to solution. It's like trying to get slum landlords to fix up their flats. You know what I mean? You kind of have to buy them all and get one big professional landlord to fix it.
Yeah.
We're doing kind of social housing development lending in Ireland. We have a platform that we set up to do that, to lend to developers. There's a housing crisis there. And then on the technology side, we've done all kinds of things from, water to moonshots, like, it's not quite a moonshot, it was when we did it, but direct air capture, like Climeworks.
Yeah.
That took real belief.
I guess congrats on the recent commissioning of Mammoth, or partial
Yeah.
commissioning.
No, it's pretty cool. But, this was before the IPCC even said that DAC was part of the solution, right? So this was back when people were all still saying there was a moral hazard of doing it.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What made you at that time say, okay, yeah, this looks good?
It was a push on humanity's ability to decarbonize in time.
There you go.
So
that's
I think that option's getting more and more valuable.
Yeah.
Right. But and it's amazing to see the changes that have happened in the last few years. I mean, 3 years ago, people were still denying climate change, and people said that what happened at the latest COP didn't go far enough. I'm like, what a strange perspective. It's like this thing happens every year, and you get the people to recognize, what, actually I'm the turkey, and I'm going to vote for Christmas, or I'm just even going to indicate, that Christmas is a good thing.
Yeah.
You just wait to see what's going to happen over the next number of years. And as the house heats up as it is, values are going to change, and value attribution is going to change. That's the big thing. Everybody talks about cost down. That's super important. But the next thing is people are going to start to say, I really need to start looking and paying for the solutions. And then you get all this incremental need from things like AI on top, the amount of extra energy that's coming onto the system. We're electrifying everything. Hydrogen had a lot of reasons why people said, some of them nefarious, why hydrogen was the thing, because it suits the incumbents. And it's brilliant for certain solutions, it's not brilliant for everything.
Sure.
And so that's where you get all of these distractions. Or cultivated meat, great thing, but we're 10 years away from ever getting, to kind of cost parity on that. So why don't you look at the things that are interesting for now? So coming back for the question, we wanted that flexibility because we can find the right solution for when somebody comes to us with the problem. But then there's even, just for nothing else, we have the vantage point to be able to see what are the biggest thing is being able to back the real bets that are going to come off and give them the scale that they need.
That's really cool.
And a bigger thing, actually, an even bigger thing is there's a ton of stuff we've done that people didn't think were investable until we did it.
All right, like what?
Well, I mean,
I'll bite.
When we invest in Climeworks, people start to go, oh, that's really interesting. When we invested in reactive technologies recently in the grid, all these people were going, it's a bit too early, it's a bit whatever. And then like the next conference we went to, somebody said they were literally the most popular company that every other investor wanted to go see. So there's a bit of crowding in that happens from it.
Yeah. So, okay, there's a kind of a dichotomy, I guess, there with crowding in versus wait and see. The turkey voted for Christmas. Is anybody else on the panel seeing a wait and see, or does it feel like a moment of crowding in?
I like the idea of investing in things that people really need. The solutions, like in our case with water, but there's many more things like waste. Countries where we work, we have an office in Guatemala, we have an office in Mexico, and Guatemala is terrible. People just dump their waste down a hill, and that's not waste. There is energy in there, for example. So that's a very interesting point, not for us, but for others to invest in. And that's an actual solution for an actual problem, and that means that solution adds value to people's lives, but also to society as a whole. So I think that's a very important direction we should all look at to make investments more worthwhile.
Yeah, I'm building on what Zach just said before, because one of the problems we see, actually, we still think in silos. Infrastructure is infrastructure, nature is nature, and you cut it down. Oh, you do energy? Oh, no, you do timber? Oh, no, this is so much. And again, the higher you go onto financial markets, the more rigid it gets. Which asset class is it? What's the risk-reward return? How can I measure it? And then it becomes really complex. And we have to break these silos and bring people in to understand. So one of the problems we're looking at, for example, is resilience of the people, in a problem of climate change. We don't have to go through that, it's preaching to the choir. However, it's how to have a solution, how you can invest actually in. So you need to look at a blue, green, and gray solution. You need to look at the investability, but also the insurability. So even insurers, the data you manage, how can you structure parametric insurances so that it's actually investable, so that a mainstream financial market investor can actually invest in it and not going crazy because it doesn't fit the mold or the party you're talking to. And I think that is where resetting, in order to solve or to adapt, mitigate, or even on the resilience of people, is a big problem. And you have people, you have the SIDS, the small island development states, screaming all over, help us, help us, help us. And then you say, okay, sorry, where do I invest? What's the risk? Can you insure? Right. And then you're down a rabbit hole.
Laura, maybe you can comment on this, that to the point about breaking silos and ecosystem development, how do you break the silos and build up the ecosystems?
Yeah, it's a great question, because obviously a lot of climate tech crosses multiple asset classes. And it's something that we wrestle with, because in the world of policy, just like in the world of investment, people tend to think in these verticals. Is it environment and climate policy, or is it business policy, or is it infrastructure policy? We try to bring those communities together. So even my colleague Prue, who's here, our head of sustainability, was telling me that soon we have an ecosystem event around fintech for net zero, so bringing together that fintech community and those investors with the climate tech community. But I think it's difficult. And to your question about, are we in a wait and see or a crowding in moment, investors aside, voting publics in Europe have clearly indicated last week that they are in a wait and see moment. And we've seen a very significant reduction in the green vote in the European elections. There are elections coming up in France and in the UK in the next 10 days. It will be really interesting to see where we end up in terms of climate policy, because clearly regulation and public sector procurement are major market makers here. And we are in a worrying place.
I think I'll tack on to that. I'm not a member of the panel, but I'm going to add an idea. There we go, sorry. Is that I was talking to a gentleman a few weeks ago who was the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer of a cement company. And he said, hey, a couple years ago, my job was pretty fluff. I didn't have to do a whole lot. It was just kind of a nice to have for the board to have me on staff, But all of a sudden, the board realized that, our EUAs, our emissions allowances are going to go away in 2035 or 2034. And there's going to be less coal for me to get fly ash to put as, filler or supplement SEM in my cement. So my job all of a sudden got really, really tactical and crunchy. And so for him, it became an urgent moment, a crowding in moment, where he has to really figure out how on earth they're going to source all this stuff, how they're going to capture the carbon. All this stuff became very real for him very quickly. I assume that's how it's going to be in a lot of these cases, that there's going to be a lot of wait and see, and then bam, here we go. Okay, I'm going to ask one more question on this sort of section, and then we'll move on. But I think this is for Robert and maybe Florian, I'm not sure, is that you mentioned you were going from, the market was going from software to hardware. And Florian, you mentioned you're investing in nature. My question is like, okay, so what happened for you to make you make that switch from software to hardware, or from energy or deep tech or hardware to nature? Maybe Robert, you first.
Thanks. So I think it's a bit of our fund's thesis that hardware space is a bit less competitive, and kind of as there's not much investment in there, we're able to find very lucrative investments. I think the way we get there and find the investments is quite interesting. So we invest throughout the kind of climate tech sector. So that's power, industrial decarbonisation, transportation, agriculture, waste, also buildings. And there's a lot of very interesting stuff happening in all of these markets. And we see corporates are getting more interested because of customer needs, regulations, pressures from stakeholders. So, how do we kind of find the best investments? And it's really understanding kind of what's going on within each of these sectors. We do innovation landscape maps to really understand what are the corporate needs and what's important for them, and kind of what innovations are required to fill any decarbonisation gap. We did one in cement, which is a super interesting sector.
There we go.
8% of global emissions. All of these corporates are finding kind of a moment of reckoning, like what the hell are we doing? And innovation in this space is absolutely flourishing. Obviously, not everybody will succeed, but having this kind of understanding, this map of, what are the corporate needs? What are they thinking about? What will they be thinking about in 10 years? What are the technology roadmaps to get there? And who are the innovators that we actually really believe in and that will make a difference? So that's kind of how we're kind of going from software to hardware, by really understanding the market and the needs and the technology.
Excellent.
So your question, for example, it's a journey, how you end up investing in nature now. And maybe originally, if you look at from a development point of view, you have ODA money, programs on the ground, and focusing a lot on smallholder farming, sustainable agriculture. As that went along, you're operating in a sector when you now want to go into the investment side, saying high risk, smallholder farming, small tickets, difficult to invest. How do you match this? Then we went basically into the space together with the support of the donors, plus the DFIs, plus then private investors, to actually create blended finance structures for SMEs initially, or MSMEs for quite some time, in order to adjust the risk-reward return to actually take the risk and invest. And then when you basically then add on that, saying, hold a second, this is not just about agriculture, you need to talk to the off-taker, you need to look at the intermediate, and you have to bring them to the table actually to make the investable solution. So you have a whole ecosystem. That's where you then started. And then at the same time, you had the CO2 markets coming up, saying, oh, now actually people are paying for, which is a difficult situation, because again, it can be also licensed to pollute. I'm an airline, I pay, it's all good, here's your money, take it, 15% I factor into my profit model, and then we keep polluting. That is not sustainable. Then also you look at if it's carbon only, betting on carbon, that's a little bit volatile. But if you combine it with the real business on the ground, the value of the land, the value of the use of the land, how landscape is managed in not a depleting way, how you can do different programs. But that's where we basically ended up into really solutions, which is blended finance, which is not a plain vanilla fund. So if we talk to the M&G, the longest story to tell, to understand, look at the fund, this is the capital we would ask from you, but there's another capital layer from a more risky
we invest in lots of it. So.
I know, I fully. Just picking on you. But again, by the way, this is why I applauded, because you were very early into this space, and you know how difficult it is actually to raise that and to explain it and to align all the different parties on a common goal and an outcome. And you have to measure that, which goes then into impact investing in space, where you do not only measure the financial returns, but the real outcome on the ground.
Let's talk about that word for a second, or phrase, explain it. So I think this could be a question for a lot of you on the panel. But the question for me is okay. So back in 2012, 2013, I used to work forever at Bloomberg, or Bloomberg NEF, if you're familiar with that, or BNEF, whatever it's called. And we tried to launch a water service back in the day, and we found, during that time, wind, solar, even batteries, were starting to really catch, and those businesses were really running well because people knew how to invest in them. We didn't have to explain a whole lot. But water, it didn't really catch for us at the time because it wasn't immediately clear to people how to invest in those, or they were too controlled by monopolies or incumbents, things like that. And so it required a lot of education, and we eventually said, you know what, okay, we cashed out. So I guess this is a question for you, Sander, but also Laura, I think for you, in that you have to explain London. Why invest in London? Why come to London? Why the foreign direct investment come to London? And so when you're how much of your jobs as investors, as operators, is spent explaining or education?
Well, the water market is a very complicated market, I would say. And I think if I would have started this company 2012 or even 5 years ago, I would not have had an audience with on my customer side. So the people who buy my service, clean water. Because these governments, I talk a lot with governments. So I talk with members of parliament, I talk with ministers, I talk with governors, with mayors, because these are the people who make the decisions to do something about it. And they simply didn't want to do it. They wanted to use their money for, I don't know, to build a road or a bridge or on any other project, which was maybe easier for them. But what you see now around the world, and it's water and with garbage, what I said earlier, same thing, with household waste. People are demanding their governments. They said, look, to give them these services, we pay you to give us clean water. We pay you to pick up our household waste, but why don't you do it? So these governments feel forced now to do something about it, and that is a major change that I see the last 2 years.
So you identified a clear problem. And that makes the explanation easier, is that right?
That makes the explanation easy because they have a problem, and obviously we talk with media. But when people are, I had a meeting with one of the water supply companies in Mexico, and we had to postpone that meeting because the office was being blocked. There was just protesters out in the street demanding clean water.
Oh wow!
So the director couldn't come into his office. So I didn't have to explain much after that. So
do you know I am? Who I am?
So what I always say to my customers is that, look, you have to provide clean water to your people.
Yeah.
Okay, so why do you build a water treatment plant? Why don't you just buy clean water? That's much easier. Let us do the investment, let us do the whole operation. We are specialists in this. And that's getting traction now. And again, that is what Laura said, that this is independent of any political direction. I mean, these are very urgent problems. Other things are maybe a little bit more abstract for people. But water and waste are very urgent problems. And in Mexico, there have just been elections, in Guatemala last year, and both sides of the spectrum, everybody was focusing on water and waste. So these main things that really have an impact on people's lives immediately, those things offer good opportunities, I would say.
Excellent.
And that requires a reset in the way you invest in these projects.
Excellent. Laura, can you explain how you explain London?
Sure. So part of our role is finding and supporting high growth businesses around the world to expand into London. So we have teams in 15 cities worldwide who are our scouts, who find interesting high growth businesses, ideally at the early stage when they're thinking about internationalization, so maybe pre-Series A, and work with them on that decision about whether to go international, when to go international, and where to go, and then support them with their expansion into the London market. And for us, it's about accelerating and de-risking the international expansion, because for a VC-backed founder, international expansion is one of the riskiest things that you'll do. It's easy to burn a lot of runway if you don't do it right. And so we work with founder teams on making sure that they come at the right time and not too soon, and that they land well. And landing well is both the operational aspect, so helping to de-risk things like, getting a bank account, data compliance, tax, audit, IT, but it's also on the upside around hiring the right team, finding clients, finding investors if that's what they're looking for in the market, and landing well in the ecosystem. So how do you actually prepare yourself to be a success when you come into the market? London in 2023 was the second biggest city for climate tech VC in the world after Stockholm. It's the #1 green finance hub, so it's a very appealing place to come and land. You have early adopting customers both on the consumer side and on the corporate side, whether you're a B2B or a B2C business. Pretty progressive climate regulation and policy, certainly at the London level. A very active pool of capital, great talent, supportive ecosystem. So the reasons to invest are clear. Our role is really to hold the hands of businesses and help them to make those investments successful, lowering the operational risks, but also accelerating the decision by giving confidence to come earlier.
I'm just thinking we should talk. That's all. Last year we started up and we decided, if you can't tell, I'm American from my accent and mannerisms, but we decided to set up shop in London. As it's
welcome.
No other option. We love it here. Anyway, that's fantastic. But you mentioned how to scale up. So my question for, I guess anybody on the panel, maybe Rob, maybe this is focused to you or Zach or to Laura, is when you're making these investments or encouraging these investments, how do you think about scale, right? When you look at investment opportunities, do you look at the TAM or the total addressable market across the world, or is it in your region, or how do you think about scale or potential for these companies that you invest in?
We consider scale from a variety of different perspectives. Scaling, but also growth. Speed of growth is very important for us, kind of ensuring that they reach kind of critical milestones quite quickly.
How quick is quick?
Very quick. Quicker the better. Speed is key. So how we do that, we work with, we take board seats at all the companies, so we're very active investors. We think about these questions, kind of commercial questions, quite deeply with them and compare different pros and cons. If it's developing the technology, finding proof points here, going international, kind of new markets, new cultures, very difficult. We also provide a lot of expert support. So we're working closely with a sister company called Carbon Limiting Technologies, a consulting firm, and we provide mentors and kind of bespoke help to deal with these questions. Another very important point on scale is not only kind of commercial proof points, but also scaling the carbon case. So when we invest, we work very heavily with their team to understand what's their potential carbon impact. And we need to internally hit and become comfortable with it, that they can hit certain numbers to be able to invest in them. So we have kind of a constraint in the investment case. So we think, okay, well, when they're at scale, what is their carbon case? When are they going to get there? And if they can't hit those numbers, we're not mandated to invest in them.
Have there been cases where you've said no because of that?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay.
We usually don't do the entire process and then say no when we have them the term sheet, but it is always one of the top 3 questions we have kind of at the first and second meeting. And then these carbon cases are validated by kind of professors or experts in the sector. So this is kind of something we take quite seriously. And they're kind of scaling the company and scaling the carbon case goes hand in hand. So these questions are extremely important for us.
Amazing, amazing. Zach, you mentioned that I keep getting stuck on this really fascinating point that you're ahead of the market in several of these investments. What are the challenges that you come across in making an investment? So my inclination was that, okay, we got to wait on policy or regulation, but maybe not in your case. What are the other challenges that you come across, and how do you get past those?
It's interesting you said about speed, and the faster the better. There's some things in life that just take as long as they need to take, and you can't speed it up. And when you start doing heavy capex industries that need to change, and when you start doing first-of-a-kind plants, and when you start doing first-of-a-kind products, which is another thing. So it's one thing to make green steel, because everybody knows what steel is. And it's one thing to do batteries, because everybody knows what that is. But also it sits in the auto value chain, and that's what people vote for when it comes to voting for politicians. Yeah. You don't vote for semiconductors, you don't vote for regenerative farming, you don't vote for things that you don't understand, like clean water, etc. You know, in the same way that people, it's like trying to tell a 25-year-old to put money in for their pension. They're just, we don't think like that, right? Yeah. So the challenge then is that the really complicated bit about the transition is the fact that it's like when you get into the NGO world, everybody wants their own one. And in the same way, you get all these people who go, oh, I've got this idea around how to reduce carbon, or I've got this way of fixing water, I've got this. And you're like, why doesn't everybody just go for, why don't we just work out what is the most sensible one and put as much capital into that? And everybody, like we did with the transistor, we're not still trying to do like, you know, like vacuums in classical computing, right? We went down one way, we said Moore's law, and let's keep cracking on that until we get there. So some of the challenges that we have are, like, I was thinking of two examples, like, you know, Green Core Homes, which we think is the most sustainable house builder in the world, that we own the majority of. That was a business that when it started, they built 50 houses, and it's using hemp and lime, you know, in panelized. So it's type 2 MMC. It's not like Lego boxes arriving on site. Okay. They're beautiful homes. But the problem is I can't scale that any faster than, you know, I still need to buy the land, I still need to get the planning, I still need to go and actually build the things. That takes time. Yeah. Or if I take UBQ, which is, you know, you mentioned about waste earlier, we set up a plant in the middle of COVID, which was not easy. You know, it was hard to get steel, it was incredibly expensive to do. A first of a kind plant to take your municipal solid waste, you know, your cat litter through to your nappies, through to your apples, through to your plastics, and you break that down into a durable thermoplastic. And now we've set up the plant, we've got it out there and running, and you know, the customers almost won't buy it until they know that you can supply this homogeneous product for them that works. And then they've got to then tweak their own production chain that they can start to put it into plastics as a filler that'll carbon neutralize, you know, their hard plastics. This is not the kind of stuff that a turtle chokes on, right? This is piping and roofing and flooring and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, like, it just takes time, and then it takes bandwidth. And so I could look at a TAM all day, and I can mess around with a financial model on a spreadsheet all day. What I need is engineers, and I need the bandwidth that I go, okay, how am I going to do a first-of-a-kind plant, then prove that it sells, and then how am I going to scale that out? Because the things that need to decarbonize in the world are all commodity-based. Yeah. And that's the weird thing. They don't have contracted offtakes. No. They didn't need to. So the price moved. So you took merchant power pricing risk. And so and that's agriculture, it's transport, it's energy, you know, it's food. And so therefore, and they're then the biggest heavy capex things that we need to transition. And the economic case is there, but you need a ton of capex to fund the OPEX savings that are going to happen over time. Yeah. And that's not easy until you get the offtakes that are there. And then the engineering to get there is super hard. So that's how I think the challenge of the scale-up is.
Amazing. There was a couple things. So a few months ago, I was talking to one of my analysts, and it was so interesting that there was a light bulb moment for him when he realized that the direction of all of these sectors that we cover, the end result, or the end state, is just a low carbon commodity. That's it. That's where it all goes. Even forests, a low carbon commodity, as it were. But my question is, on a lot of these low carbon commodities, we were talking with the New York Highway Authority, I think it was, a few months ago, and they were saying, you know what, green cement's great and all, but we're just going to buy what the state tells us to buy. That's it. What is the role of government or blended finance or catalytic capital in these sectors, maybe right now? And maybe, Laura, we'll start with you. I think everybody might have a different opinion on this. Let's keep this one snappy. Yeah. We'll go down the line, yeah. Maybe use your mic.
In a lot of these commodity markets, particularly around transport and utilities, obviously governments, public sector are major buyers, so they have a big role as market makers. But more broadly, there's an issue around procurement and how we move markets to buy not just innovation, but disruption. And that's much more challenging, to Zachary's point.
Buying disruption, that's interesting.
And one of the things that we have been trying to do in London is to move the market for buying disruption by working with the innovation directors of major buyers. So we actually run a training program where we take the innovation directors of the biggest corporates in the market and we work with them on how do we buy innovation and disruption in different and new ways. Because they're the people that have to go and fight the internal battles with procurement, with treasury, with their internal policies and compliance and processes to say, actually, rather than just buying the same product but in a different way, we need to completely change our operating model to buy a totally different product in future.
Yeah.
So over the last 3 years, we've trained 150 of the innovation directors of the biggest businesses in the market in London. And we do that, coming back to the point about ecosystem building, to change the ecosystem environment by moving the market for innovation and disruption in London, so that when we have startup companies that have great ideas, or even scale-up companies, they can find a market that is prepared to move with them. And that's really hard. These are cultural challenges about the way, mindset, the way different silos are seen, taxonomies, internal metrics, internal processes, relationship with shareholders. These are complicated issues, and it's easy to make the buyer the baddie, and to say they're just being slow and they're laggards and they don't adopt. And I think we have to also understand the internal barriers that the buyers face and have empathy and work with them and support them to be better buyers in the market.
Here.
Good, thanks. So the point I'll try to make actually relates both to Zach's points on speed and also Laura's points on kind of getting some demand. So first, the first point, I think speed and timing are two very important points. And I think maybe Zach was speaking a bit more about timing. I think the role of the government is to move forward the timing where these solutions will be the economic solution. And this can be done primarily, I think, by kind of stimulating demand, which you're talking about, kind of getting in the right regulation, educating the procurers, maybe working cross-collaboratively with industry to say, well, we need this pretty soon, and then these demand signals will flow down both the capital markets but also to innovators. And it'll kind of increase the flow of innovation and prime the flow of investments into these innovators. So kind of the government's doing demand-led innovation or demand programs, working with industry, de-risking projects, kind of being maybe an insurer for some offtake agreements. That's what I think they can do the most. And if they do that, they'll move the timing forwards of when these investments will and innovations will be able to kind of come to market.
Excellent.
I think there's two sides to this always. I think there's a pincer movement if you want to get anybody to change their, to make these choices. One is the push, the other is the pull. So there's no point asking a buyer to buy something green if the solution isn't there and if it's not somewhat cost comparable and if they don't know about it, right? Yeah. So one, you got to do the education piece, you got to get your costs down, you got to get it to something that actually gives them a reasonable choice of something to buy and that they know that you can deliver it in scale. And on the other side, then you can regulate them. But there's no point doing the latter without the solutions. Yeah. And so I kind of say it's a bit like going out there and sticking a load of biological pesticide on your garden. If you want a nice garden, you stick a load of pesticide down and you weed it. But if you forget to feed it, you're not going to have any nice plants. So, this kind of the stick approach in Europe versus the carrot approach in the US. Yeah. And it's a carrot approach because the stick, they couldn't get it through, right? We're
not good at that
but that's fine. But the carrot approach is doing really well. And so I think that's one of the things that realizing both of these things are required. Mm-hmm. It happened in the military world for many, many years, and that was seen as essential. There's a war on climate going on. Maybe we could make it a bit more essential everywhere because it's the most important thing. And as I said, values are going to change. We're going to slip back down Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It won't be about brands and self-fulfillment. I'll stop saying I need to spend 100 quid on a shirt, that costs 10 quid to make. I might spend 20 quid, or we can value attribute that the shirt costs 20 quid. It could still cost me 100. Yeah. We just don't give 90 to the brand person. We give 80 to them. Yeah. So, when the house is burning, we come back down to the physiological needs that we need to sort it out.
Definitely.
Yeah, I recognize what Laura says. I mean, we work a lot with governments, and first I was blaming the politicians, the procurement people, because they have all this complicated procurement laws and procedures, and that's true. But then we started working together with them, and there are, for example, mayors that we work together with, who do want to innovate, who do want to, tackle these problems, and that really helps. So we, instead of focusing on, for example, larger cities, where everything was very difficult because these people are accountable, they have responsibilities, they don't want to change often. We found first some smaller cities where we introduced these, and those guys were very enthusiastic, and that really helped. We sat together with the council, for example, in Antigua, Guatemala, UNESCO World Heritage Site. We sat with the mayor and his council, and he said, "How are we going to pay for to Dutch Cleantech, to me?" So we brainstorming with them. That was a very nice session. So, okay, how many tourists do you have? Well, we have 1.6 million Americans coming here every year.
Sorry, I went on my honeymoon.
It's nice, huh?
It's beautiful.
Yeah, I know. So how about if we tax all of them like $1 more? They don't feel that. They're okay with that.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, you're okay even if it's $2 to pay for clean water, right?
Definitely.
So problem solved. So, and this is something they could decide on a municipal level. They didn't have to go to the national level to change legislation or something like this. So this is how we try to do it. And when you get these early adopters or the innovators getting along, you see that others are also moving. Now, Guatemala City, for example, the mayor is looking like, what's happening there in Antigua? Okay, I mean, that's not, I want to be the next president, so I need better make sure that I also install a wastewater treatment plant.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
I think from one of the big difficulties today's world is to communicate something complex very easily. Because it boils down, what do I invest in? What's my financial return? And what does that investment, on top of having a financial return from an investor point of view? But if you look at the ground and you say, okay, there was hot something, carbon market, everybody says, okay, let's go into forest. Oh, hold a second. The mature forest actually not necessarily sinking, absorbing that much carbon. Oh, then let's go to, okay, eucalyptus. It grows fast. And so it absorbs nicely, but then this is not sustainable because it depletes the ground.
Right.
And but then I need actually more water. Where do I get the water? Okay, then I have a problem. Okay,
but now,
yes, exactly. but then you specifically Mexico. Look at the lakes no longer existing because there's no water. Or you have agriculture, avocados being up there in the mountain, and the village down doesn't have any water more. Or you have the big discussion between the U.S. and Mexico because the Rio Grande or Rio Bravo, where you say that, doesn't have enough water. And even the Mexico City itself, is running weeks out of water. So it boils down to, number one, we need to be fast because we don't have time. Second, we might think about, some of the population of the world thinks about, climate change is not man-made. Doesn't matter. The fact is, it is coming. We need to brace for it. And then it connects all. So back to your question also, when you said catalytic capital, it is essential that you have non-for-profit pockets of money on technical assistance to do and get projects up to be investable first. Then you take that also into catalytic capital tranches in the blended finance fund, where it's not meant to make a return, it's just to protect and to risk lower so that others can invest. So you can cascade a house bottom up. But you have to look at not just short-term jump on something. You have to look at what does it mean for food security? What does it mean if you're investing in a reef? In biodiversity, wonderful. But if the water boils, everything is bleached.
Right.
There are so many factors into where it always comes back to, if you have to explain something complex very easy, why you should do something. It goes back to the shirt. Zach, you were saying is, because the point is then today is, okay, if I spend money by buying a product, or if I spend money by investing, I would have to have in mind what I'm getting financially, but also what is this actually making the world. And there the regulator comes back to the stick. If you look at the impact investing, right. SFDR 8, SFDR 9 rules, sometimes you say, hey, you make it more expensive for me as an asset manager to manage the funds because I have to more data, more regulation, these things. And the others who do not, just investing for the sake of investment, larger tickets and no matter what, are actually not, they have an advantage financially. So I just want to explain a little bit the complexity, but the house is built bottom up, and you have to have the non-for-profit pockets, the riskier pockets, and the de-risk pockets to play all along in order to have really a systemic change.
I love that. The house is built bottom up. It's fantastic. Okay, as a responsible moderator, we've got 3 to 5 minutes. And I really apologize. I've been looking this way the whole time, basically. Is there any questions from this side of the audience? Any burning questions? Yes. We've got just a couple minutes for questions, and we'll keep going.
Hi, thank you very much. I was wondering for Robert and Zachary specifically, if you're sourcing the technology solutions that you're investing in from London or from the UK, and how are you going around the IP situations with the universities?
Can I start? It's a very simple question for us. We're mandated to only invest in the UK. So yeah, all of these technologies are from here. With the universities, they usually have technology spin-out offices, usually kind of quite standard agreements, so we work with them there. Sometimes they have a bit of equity investment in the spin-outs, so usually incentives are aligned.
Yeah, it's one of the things when you start doing deep tech investing that it's always, or it's a lot of it is associated with universities or around it. And so we went that bit further when we started. We actually backed a number of the universities. So we gave capital to a number of these different vehicles. So one, we could support them to get the businesses to where they need to get to. And then we're able to come in and pick the ones that we think have got the most promise and then give them the proper scale of that capital to get to the next phase. We've done that in the UK, but we're doing that in other parts of the world. We're a global investor, but I think we're up there as people's first call when it comes to, or one of the first when it comes to that kind of growth scale for UK tech.
Amazing. I was wrong. We need to start wrapping up now. So I really just want to kind of wrap up by saying, that we learned a lot on this panel, that it's all about ecosystem development, benefits beyond return, building the house from the bottom up. It's all fantastic, and trying to solve that missing middle. I, for one, am hopeful about this reset in climate tech investment, and I learned a ton from the panelists today about how they're thinking about it as well, and I think we all can be fairly confident with this crowd at the helm making these investments. So I'd like to really give a warm thanks to our panelists and join me in thanking them for their time today.